Abu al-Walid Muhammad ibn Rushd, or known to us from his Latin name, Averroes. Here we are, this great philosopher, the son of Cordoba, and it's fitting that Seneca the Younger looks upon him because at a distance of 1100 years, they both are part of a great tradition stretching back to the 4th century BCE in ancient Athens and stretching forward to our time. Because Averroes was one of the greatest philosophers that brought Aristotelianism to the modern age, Aristotle's teachings, and he did it in a most magnificent and beautiful way by showing the ways that philosophy and religion can be part of the common approach to finding truth. Now, the story of Averroes in Cordoba is that he was part of a very illustrious family. His grandfather was the senior Qadi, the top judge of the city under Islamic rule. His father was also a Qadi or judge, and this meant that Averroes got a wonderful classical education. He was trained in all of the major fields of knowledge of his day. That means religion, of course, the Quran and the hadiths of Muhammad, the sayings and the tales of Muhammad, but also in medicine, in philosophy, in law. So all of the major areas of teaching made him a polymath, a genius in many areas. He excelled in astronomy, he excelled in medicine, he excelled in law, he excelled in religious instruction, he excelled in philosophy. And his intellectual reach was astounding, and so astounding that 900 years later it continues to reverberate. To understand Averroes' place in intellectual history, we should appreciate the decisive role of the Arab world in philosophy to this day, because the Arab world, from its beginnings in the early 7th century and at least to the time of Averroes, was the very center of philosophical and scientific and medical knowledge and thinking in the world. It was a vast region stretching from Baghdad in Western Asia all the way to Al-Andalus in today's modern Spain. This vast stretch of thousands of kilometers of an Islamic world that was also a world that was open to many, many influences from other cultures. The Islamic caliphs, the leaders of the Islamic world, were extremely interested in ancient knowledge. And from the time of the Umayyad dynasty in Damascus, and then especially with the Abbasid dynasty based in Baghdad, the caliphs called for the ancient learning to be translated from the Greek into Arabic, and they assembled the most impressive and important libraries of the whole world. At the very moment that these texts were being lost in Western Europe, when in the scriptoriums of the monasteries, the places where books were copied and recopied, the ancient Greek texts viewed as pagan were left aside, these crucial texts of Aristotle and Plato and the scientists of the Greco-Roman world were translated into Arabic and preserved for the future onward until today. But more than that, throughout the Islamic world, influences came from India, which was home to great mathematics and and astronomical observation. Influences came from Persia, which was a major influence in the Abbasid Caliphate. So this was a vast region of the world geographically, a common space of Islam, but also a large space in which the influences of ancient and other contemporaneous cultures played a role. And one of the most famous places for this was the Beit al-Hakim, the House of Wisdom, which was the great center of learning of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. And the libraries and centers of learning in Baghdad were unrivaled in the world until the Mongol invasions came and the books were strewn into the sea, into the rivers, and destroyed. But before that disaster struck, this vast area of learning, of course, included Al-Andalus, included Cordoba as the capital of the emir of the Umayyad rulers, and then the Caliphate of Cordoba, the center of Al-Andalus. And that is where Averroes was born and educated and began his philosophical training. In fact, he traveled the Arab world and traveled in North Africa. He was a famed doctor, he was a famed astronomer, and of course, he was a famed philosopher. At the core of his philosophy was the idea that philosophy and religion not only could coexist, but in fact were two ways of approaching vital knowledge. And so they had to be consistent because they were both paths to the truth. And this is a radical idea, an idea that would be shared by his Jewish contemporary, Maimonides. He was also, Averroes, an Aristotelian, meaning that he followed Aristotle's teachings from the texts that had been translated from the ancient Greek into Arabic and that had arrived in Al-Andalus. And not only was he a follower of Aristotle's metaphysics and Aristotle's ideas about psychology and about ethics, but he was a commentator on Aristotle also, and he became known to the Western world, the Latin medieval world, as the commentator for the philosopher. So he was not only a core part of teaching Aristotle, but it was his commentaries that were then received in the new universities of Western Europe. And so Averroes was the way that Aristotle was introduced to the Catholic West, to the scholars in the University of Paris and the other new universities in Western Europe. So in this way, with Seneca the younger and with Averroes, we see a tradition of making known how the ancient Greek wisdom, both in its moral philosophy, in its politics, and Averroes was a great commentator of Plato's Republic, and also in its metaphysics, its speculations about God as prime mover of the universe, the one that sets the universe in motion, but then in which the universe proceeds according to the principles that God has established, what would become known as natural law afterwards, or the laws of nature. These were absolute core teachings, and fundamental to the teachings of Averroes and his contemporary Maimonides is the idea that the human intellect can find the truth, that the human intellect, by searching for the truth, by philosophical speculation, by honoring the God-created world, can find the truth, and from the truth can find the path to the right kind of life. These are dramatic ideas that shaped the modern world, but they were also very dramatic for the more narrowly minded and literalist theologians that Averroes confronted late in life. He was much praised and prized, but then he began to fall out with the more austere and fundamentalist ulama, the priests who said, what is this philosophy? We have the Quran, and philosophy is outside of the proper teachings. It happened that this golden age of Islamic philosophy that included not only Averroes, but great philosophers like Avicenna and Al-Farabi, in the end had vast influence in the Western world, but were largely forgotten in the Islamic world after the 1200s, because Islam took a turn towards a more formal, religious-based, fundamentalist interpretation in which philosophy could not play that expansive role of joining religion and science in this full flowering. While that is perhaps too simplistic a story, it is the fact that Averroes comes to us today largely through his decisive influence in Western philosophy, even more than his influence through Arab philosophy in later centuries. His texts became translated by the great translators in Toledo. They became known and received at the University of Paris and other centers of learning in Europe, and Averroism therefore had its major historical contribution and a major contribution in continuing the idea that this ocean of knowledge with all of these contributing rivers of knowledge can flow together and enrich each other. And Averroes plays a phenomenal role in that joining together of knowledge from multiple traditions and showing that they can all play a role in the search for truth.